I'm Scott Mitchell. This is Mitchell Talks, the News 9 Sessions. AM anchor extraordinaire Grant Herms doing those truth tests, and Capitol correspondent, Capitol Chief Aaron Brillback. Good to have you guys here.
Good being
the Chief. That's right.
The Chief.
I like it.
The Chief. All right. So last week we had a conversation with Mick Cornett, our last audio blog, right? And this week we asked Mr. Stitt if he would like to come. Take it from there, Aaron.
In the interest of fairness, reached out to Mr. Stitt's campaign, said, hey, we'd love to have you on this show that we're doing. Initially they said, yeah, sure. And then they said, no, we're not going to be on as long as Grant Herms is there.
That's my fault. That is my fault. We've done a couple truth tests lately that they've not been thrilled with.
Yeah.
We'll get into that in a minute.
All right, so they're not going to be here, but we have that on the record now. Let's start with the truth test that's got the Stitt folks upset.
Mayor Cornett didn't back Donald Trump for president.
I have not endorsed Donald Trump.
Don't you normally endorse the nominee?
Yeah, I would. Normally I have.
Mayor Cornett's not just a never Trumper. Cornett defended sanctuary cities and said building President Trump's border wall, quote, ain't going to get us anywhere. He actually said that.
So is this ad telling the truth? Mostly, but let's take a look at that first claim. Did Cornett decide not to back the president? Yeah, but he didn't endorse anybody else either. Here's the rest of that interview from October, just before the election.
I have not endorsed Donald Trump or any other candidate in this race. Normally I have. This is an unusual case with a candidate who has said some outrageous things, and I have just, as open-minded as I have remained, I have just not seen a way to endorse him and the strategies that he's used in this campaign. I don't think they're helpful for America.
So what about the border wall? Let's take a look. The ad is taking quotes from USA Today here, where Cornett does say the border wall isn't going to get us anywhere. The attack ad says ain't instead of isn't, but the idea is still the same. And on sanctuary cities, the ad is downright false. What Cornett actually said is the term sanctuary city was a political term, not a legal one, saying during an interview at the Conference of Mayors in 2017, to me, that's the only end result of that term. It's not a term that we understand or use. So, how does this attack do? On its three claims, we give it two truths and a false. So that was the one that the Stitt campaign put out about Mick Cornett. Now, we rated that true. It calls him a never Trumper. We didn't get into that part of it. That's a spectrum. That's something that's on, that's anywhere from did you not endorse him or are you Jeff Flake? So we didn't really assess that one, but we did test the other parts of it. Did he not endorse Trump? That's true. We didn't do it. We played the full clip in that piece there. And actually is worse for Mick Cornett really in that regard than what the ad mentions there. We said it was, true that he said the wall isn't going to help anyone. They used the word ain't instead. They misquoted him, which I thought was an interesting. I don't know if that was a choice or not, but if it was a choice, it was deliberate, obviously.
I saw that. Now, some of the comments that he made were taken out of context, though.
Yes, yeah, slightly. So, like the first one we're talking about, you mean?
Right.
Yeah, that one. She's Andrea Mitchell from MSNBC is asking, you would normally have endorsed a candidate by this point. He said, no, I've been trying to be open-minded. The actual quote is, he said, the strategies that Trump used in the campaign were not helpful for America. And so that ended up probably being a little more damning for him than he wanted.
Right, and Mick has backed away from that quite a bit since then. As many public appearances as he's making, he's talking about how he's a supporter of Donald Trump. He's not in favor of sanctuary cities, so he's really trying to drive those points home, which tells me that the commercials did make an impact on his campaign.
I think so, and I think you see both candidates and candidates in other races running to the president instead of away, which I thought was interesting because the candidate in the race for the governor who actually had the endorsement of somebody from the Trump White House, Trump Jr., lost. Todd Lamb lost. I thought that was interesting.
Right. I'm not seeing a whole lot of them gravitating to Mary Fallon, though.
No, how strange.
Haven't seen that happen once.
No, I think that below 20% approval rating has something to do with that a little bit.
Might have something to do with it.
All right, so let me ask you this before we get to the Illinois case, another truth test. There has been some developments on the national level this week dealing with the president. Can't wait to see the first poll, by the way, to see what happens with this. You think that's a good idea, trying to be the closest to Trump just before the runoff?
At this point, and I think, honestly, Trump has proven himself to be Teflon. You're not hearing from people who are staunch Trump supporters that they're very concerned about what they're seeing on the national stories from this past week, the two guilties. People who support him are still supporting him.
Well, sometimes truth is not truth.
Sometimes truth is not true.
Yeah, sometimes the truth isn't truth. Right.
And speaking of truth, there was another truth test And this one has to do with the state of Illinois, and here it is.
You may have seen this ad from a group backing Mick Cornett about Kevin Stitt's time as CEO of Gateway Mortgage.
Stitt's company? One of the worst loan default rates nationwide, double the average. Stitt's company faced big fines in Arkansas, had its license revoked for fraud in Illinois. Worse, Stitt's company was banned from doing business in Georgia.
How true are these claims? Pretty true, but there is some spin here. So when it comes to Stitt's company being one of the worst, that's true. The claims come from a list of the worst lenders using Federal Housing Administration loans in 2010. Gateway Mortgage made the list and had a default rate close to 10%. The national average at the time was 5%. But for the ad to not give the time frame is some political spin. How about that list of states? According to each state's finance or banking agencies, this is true too. Stitt's company did face fines in Arkansas, and its license was revoked in Illinois after claims of fraud. In fact, he was fined or punished in 8 states, including Georgia, which did ban his company for life. As of June of this year, that ban was lifted, and it cleared Gateway Mortgage to reapply for a license. But overall, this ad checks out, so we're going to give it a rating of true. So overall, that's Kevin Stitt's business record at Gateway. This is the second time we've done a truth test about this record. There's some different things in this. Some different things have happened since our first truth test before the last primary, including the ban in Georgia being lifted, last month.
Right. Now, he didn't fare very well for this. Again, we'd ask Stitt to come out and talk to us about this, defend himself. He wouldn't come out, but his campaign did send out a statement saying, quote, "In fact, here is the truth. Gateway only does single-family mortgages. Therefore, it's only appropriate to look at single-family mortgage delinquency rates, not delinquency rates that summarizes all other lending industries. Single-family mortgage delinquency rates nationwide averaged approximately 2.5% before 2008. By the end of 2010, the nationwide delinquency rate peaked at 11.5%. Gateway's delinquency rate during these periods was lower than the national average. Today, Gateway's delinquency rate is still lower than its peers across all categories at 1.20%. The nationwide average delinquency rate in Q2 of 2018 was 2.61% for all loans. The Gateway delinquency rate is less than half of the national average." How do you take that?
It's convenient that they've taken the actual time context out of their defense here. So what we tested was when the FHA housing loan default rate was at 5%. That was March of 2010. So this is just after the crash, after things have started to kind of balloon out again. We're starting to get the full picture of what happened after the financial crash. And at that time, their default rate was 10.19%. So they are leaving that part out of this. And yeah, by the end of 2010, everything had ballooned because everybody got caught and was doing their mea culpas, and these things had evened out. But they're leaving out the actual thing, and the FHA numbers are the FHA numbers. That's just how that works. That's what we have. That's what everybody else uses. So their defense here really falls short for leaving that out.
Their argument, though, that they only do family mortgage.
That's still the FHA loans. That's still the number we're using from HUD and FHA.
Good. You also touched on, during your truth test, the Illinois case. What they had done is they had sent me a statement citing a News OK article that says, quote, "In the Illinois case, a consent order states that the Illinois banking agency investigated a Gateway loan originator for, quote, alleged real estate appraisal and mortgage fraud scheme. Gateway fired the employee, asked for a hearing, then agreed to what investigators found. Gateway agreed to a $10,000 fine and a probation period from June 2009 to January 2010. The order states that Gateway's license was to be reinstated immediately. Stitt campaign spokeswoman Donnell Harder says the license in Illinois was never revoked. She'd said that the Illinois agency had issued a letter of intent to revoke the license, but Gateway gave Gateway time to appeal. The state agreed after the appeal not to revoke the license, she said. So is that valid?
No. Logically, it doesn't make any sense. Appeal or no appeal, you can't reinstate something that was never revoked. Even if it was just the judge being like, give me your license, I'm passing it from this hand to this hand, and I'll give it right back to you. That's a problem. If you have a problem with that, then that's a problem with the financial industry and how we prosecute these things. But really, you can't give something back that was never taken away in the first place. I mean, I've got the consent order right here, and it includes the effective immediately. Reinstates Gateway's license effective immediately. Then if they want to quibble with that, then fine, I guess. But logically, that doesn't make any sense.
So what does this say to you that Stitt was not willing to come here to News 9 to defend this?
It's cowardly. They're cowards. He and anybody from his campaign not willing to do that. Just, if this is how Kevin Stitt would run his governor's office, to shut out the media if they get criticism, that's saying something right here.
And generally speaking, if you're just sending out a statement and you're not facing the cameras, you're not facing reporters, that's something people need to worry about.
And I think it's suspect about how confident you are in that answer and how strong it would hold up to questioning.
This is the point where I make the Roger Rabbit sound. Here's why. Because what we just talked about is so in the weeds. What do you think Jack and Jill Sixpack are going to say about the particular truth test? It is so in the weeds. I'm wondering, is it making a difference? You know the Leslie Stahl quote, they don't listen to the words, they just look at the pictures, right? And those ads that Stitt is running saying Mick is not conservative. I mean, how into the weeds are runoff voters going to be on an issue like this? Will it make any difference?
That depends on what kind of runoff voter I think we're going to look at here. You've got a runoff primary election. Those people tend to be more plugged in. So I'm curious to find out if they are the people who care about these things. In Stitt's case, you would expect that if he's going to be the candidate for the forgotten man, for the everyman, that troubles in the financial sector, one of the worst offenders that helped cause, more or less, the financial crash, that would hurt the average rural Oklahoman voter, even if Oklahoma was pretty insulated from that crash.
You would think so.
Yeah. But it could also just be that they don't care. At the end of the day, he backs the president, he's an outside candidate, which they like, and they'll say, well, he's better than any Democrat. So.
And this will be an interesting test because we know that these slam campaigns, these slam commercials, we know that they work. If they didn't work, campaigns would not run them. Even in a place as friendly as Oklahoma, where Oklahomans say, you know, we don't want to see the mud being thrown. We don't want to see people angry with each other. Secretly, people want to see the mud being thrown. People, they want to see the fight. They want to see the knockdown, drag out kind of thing. That's why these commercials work. That's why we keep running them. When they stop working, they'll stop running them.
They also get people to pay attention. Mm-hmm. People are like, I would love for them to stand on their own merits and their own policy. You don't listen when they do that. Candidates have tried, and it doesn't work. You also learn more, generally, from a negative ad. They tend to contain more truth than the positive ads about a candidate. You're allowed to kind of build yourself up a little more legally than you're allowed to tear your opponent down.
Or more half-truth.
Or more half-truth.
Can I ask you guys about one other ad that, I don't know if did you test Bull Stitt?
I did not test Bull Stitt.
Okay, so let me just ask you this. That was you're on your 2-yard line, and it's fourth down based upon the polling that I'm hearing about, and you go for the bomb. Now, it depends on if it's Aaron Rodgers throwing it or Jamarcus Russell, right? I mean, there's a difference. So what are you hearing about that one, the Bull Stitt ad? I'm hearing all over the place, but the question is, what are the runoff voters hearing? Your gut instinct on this.
You know, it's pretty clear that Stitt wasn't crazy about it. There was another debate this past week, and it was brought up, and there was a lot of tension between the two candidates at that point. So it was clear that Stitt wasn't willing to roll with this thing, which honestly I think that he probably took that the wrong direction. If I was him, I would have played on the joke. I would have, made myself up to be somebody, I get the jokes, man. That's cool, whatever. I would have been somebody who rolled with it. He decided not to. He obviously took a lot of offense to it. Whether or not Oklahomans take offense to it, I guess remains to be seen at the polls. But this was probably one of the better commercials that was rolled out. It's certainly the one that's garnered the most attention.
I wonder if they're playing with fire a little bit here, the Cornette campaign, because do you hope that they associate his last name with what they're implying? This is still YouTube, I can't say that, I guess.
Bull Stitt.
Or do you then risk them having the name recognition of giving Kevin Stitt's last name all that kind of airtime that he didn't pay for, even if it is connected to a negative ad?
Yeah, and I think that's a fair risk. It was a calculated risk. I think that they went with the whole, this is funny enough, people are going to dig it enough, and it's going to make Cornette look a little bit more human, not quite so robotic. He's one of us. He can joke around.
He has had a relatability problem lately, and I think part of what happened in that other debate when he got pretty heated was to show some of that personality, because it did kind of just end.
Yeah, and I think it came out pretty well initially. For whatever reason, they stopped it kind of while it was mid-flow, but I think that worked in Cornette's favor. It showed him to be somebody who's human. It showed him to be somebody who's able to take a punch and willing to throw two back.
The armchair guys and girls are going to say Wednesday morning, well, it was that ad that did it for Mick. Or they're going to say, well, they shouldn't have done that ad. You see this coming. I mean, that's the ad people are talking about. You said it's a high-risk maneuver, and if he wins, it's going to get all the credit, and if he loses, it's going to get all the blame. Can we turn for just a moment to down-ballot races?
Sure.
You hear the crickets? It's except for the Attorney General's race, and you've done truth tests on those.
We did two of those this
races.
week.
You want to hit those in terms of that race because it's, besides the ads, it's not near as loud, in my opinion, from what I'm seeing in the runoff as it was in the primary between Mr. Drummond and Attorney General Hunter.
Right. Only in the last couple of days has it really ramped up to be a little uglier. The ugliness we've come to know from this race so far. Drummond has made many claims about Hunter's record, but we are taking a look at one he's making about Hunter's current work, suing drug makers over the opioid epidemic. Here he was in last month's debate.
Presently, we have a no-bid, no-cap contract to political patrons of Mr. Hunter who maximize their contributions within days of signing that contract, and they will get upwards of $100 million.
And it wasn't just on TV either. Here he is making a similar claim in a press release, a no-bid contract worth $100 million. So is Drummond telling the truth? Kind of. But there's a lot of political spin. Here's why. According to the contract signed by Witten Burrage, the law firm Hunter hired to run the opioid case, the agreement isn't worth any explicit amount. Instead, it's on a pay scale that looks like this. The firm gets 25% of any payout to the state between $0 and $100 million, all the way up to 35% of a payout more than $500 million. But there's no mention of it explicitly being worth $100 million. So what about the no-bid part? That's shady, right? The no-bid part, no. Who it went to, that's something else. According to state law, contracts for professional services, including lawyers, are exempt from contract bidding, meaning even if Hunter wanted to send out a bid request, he couldn't. As for who it went to, members of the law firm and their family members have donated extensively to Hunter's campaign, including in the weeks before the lawsuit was filed. Reggie Witten, one of the named partners at the firm, says he donated to Hunter because he believes in his fight against drug companies. Witten lost a son to opioid addiction in 2002 and later started a group for addiction awareness, but he is still a donor. Drummond is trying to build a case that the deal is shady, but it's built on twisting some facts to make the contract sound more lucrative and shady than it actually is. That's why we're calling this misleading.
Talk to us a bit about that. What did that show?
Well, basically, it shows that Drummond has lawyered this thing within an inch of its life to not be completely false, but it is misleading. He really is twisting how this works. Now, Witten is a donor. Witten and Burrage are both donors, and their family members are donors. They have ties to opioid addiction, and they had family members who were killed. Same thing with, you'll see in the next truth test here, Craig Box talking about that. Hunter is kind of doubling down on his relationships with families who've been touched by opioid addiction and the crisis. But the twisting of the contract and the wording of it is how we got to misleading on this one.
When you lose a child, it's the last thing you think about before you go to bed.
It's the latest attack ad about Gentner Drummond from Attorney General Mike Hunter, the father of OU star football player Austin Box, taking aim.
The fact that Gentner Drummond would attack this opioid lawsuit is insulting to me and the memory of my son.
There's not much in the ad we could test, but it does send you to a website, SaveOklahomaLives.com, paid for by Hunter's campaign. The site says Drummond wants to shift the focus to opioid addicts and that he defends drug companies. Neither is completely true. The site links to an unofficial transcript from an Oklahoma District Attorneys Association meeting. Drummond is quoted as saying, if those addicted to opioids can't get their stuff together, they need to go to jail. But doesn't say the focus needs to shift to addicts alone. In the full quote, he says the lawsuit should be comprehensive and include drug makers, distributors, doctors, and users. When it comes to defending drug companies, it's more of a compliment wrapped in an insult. Hunter's campaign says Drummond championed the drug makers' legal work, but the quote they use doesn't say that. What Drummond actually said was Hunter made a rookie mistake that opened the door for the legal teams of drug companies. No defense and no praise. What about sabotaging the lawsuit? We couldn't find any hard evidence that's true. Save Oklahoma Lives gives 4 pieces of evidence, but it only shows Drummond stating opinions. No direct actions to undermine the state's case against drug companies. Some may argue that Drummond is trying to signal to drug companies he'd be more favorable to them if he's elected, but that's more reading the politics than what's on paper. Overall, the site is more of what we've come to expect from this race so far, an ugly war of words. But these words venture more into untrustworthy territory, so we'll rate Hunter's claims misleading.
That's the second highest profile race. By the way, to me, the story after the runoff is going to be that contract, because that was a deal with the state, and there are people like Oklahoma City and counties that are going, we want in on this deal. So there's a lot more story to go forward there. How do you guys see this playing out?
Well, honestly, I'm with you. I was real surprised at how quickly this turned from the race to watch, where everybody's angry with each other and getting pretty nasty, to what it is now. It's kind of, for the most part, people have forgotten about it. They haven't had the same level of venom they had as initially.
I wonder if people have already made up their minds on this or not, or they're just going to get there and vote for the name that they like. I have no idea.
This has only been said 10 million times, so I'll make it 10 million and one. Depends on the turnout. You know, this is how that all works. And then on down the ballot, Lieutenant Governor, not hearing anything about that. We're going to try to do something this weekend about that. But then Auditor Inspector, a huge race. A lot on that. It's the continuation, or is it the continuation of the Gary Jones administration? There's lots of controversy there. Also, there's other down ballot races. The question for me is, how's the press done? How's the media done at covering these down ballot races for the voters?
Marginally well. I mean, as across media generally, that's a broad term. I think okay. But we've, especially in TV and especially in most larger papers, we're focused on the shiny object that's out there, and that's the governor's race, and that's the attorney general's race.
Right. And I think, obviously, we could always be better at anything that we do, but Grant's absolutely right. It's the one that's garnering the most attention that we're going to be paying the most attention to. And at this point, it's the Bullstead ad. I mean, everybody was all over that thing. We're still seeing a little bit of dirt. You said in the auditor's race, for example, is a prime example. Charlie Prater is still throwing some pretty nasty punches that Gary Jones is disputing. But we're not really focusing on that as much as we're focusing on the gubernatorial race.
Leslie Osborne's thrown some serious mud in the commissioner's race over Kathy Costello as well. I also think that if we focus on the attorney general's race and the governor's race, those are the two offices that the rest of the country sees Oklahoma the most through.
And you mentioned the Leslie Osborne, Kathy Costello. Let's take a look at that commercial real quick.
Professional politicians, famous families, and political dynasties have failed Oklahoma. Meet Kathy Costello, dishonestly claiming someone else's record as her own. Costello's shameful record: didn't pay her taxes, multiple state tax liens, claims to be a classroom teacher, but records show Costello was never certified, and Costello has never really run a job-creating business. Enough famous last names: dishonest Kathy Costello, unqualified, unprepared, unfit to be our Commissioner of Labor.
Now, Kathy Costello obviously is very well loved. Everybody knows her story. People are very sympathetic towards her story. Do you think that might hurt Leslie Osborne because of the love and the sympathy that people have for Kathy Costello and the situation that she was put into?
I don't actually know. I don't know enough about this race. I've been following it very closely. I know that Leslie Osborne is like a wonks candidate. They like her. They think she's competent. They liked her record while she was in the legislature. But I think Costello has name recognition, and I think that the memory of her husband and now what happened with her son and her campaigning on mental health as labor commissioner does strike those heartstrings in a particular way.
Yeah, and you're right about Leslie Osborne. People who follow politics know that oftentimes she would go against what Republicans were saying. She would go against her own bosses. There were a few times that she was, during different committee meetings, she had said some things that people thought were kind of surprising, where she was essentially saying, I'm just presenting this because my boss told me to. I think that a lot of Republicans like and respect that. But again, Kathy Costello, she's got the name recognition. We all know what happened, the tragedy of her husband's death. How she followed through with it in terms of being an advocate for mental health. People do like Kathy Costello. So I'm wondering if this kind of commercial might backfire on Leslie Osborne, because it did appear to be kind of some low blows.
Well, obviously what they're trying to do there is they're trying to get the focus on qualifications, and the media's been really loath to try to get into that. Because we all understand that particular story. The ad speaks to the qualifications. In the old days, that might have been something with less statewide races that the press would have really gotten into, her qualifications. So we'll see how that plays out. It's time to talk about weed. Because, it's already time. It's about, well, here's the point.
It's 4:20.
Yeah, it's pretty close. This is happening at the Capitol. Aaron, would you bring us up to date on what these hearings are about and what's going on. We've had so many weeks of this particular issue ever since the primary, and people are still, I was watching a little bit of it, and it looked like it was let's just say it was interesting to watch the presentations there. And we were joking about the fact that Cheech and Chong played their way into this, or the Cheech and Chong stereotype, courtesy of Dr. Cox. Take us along the way of what's happening here.
Well, basically what these hearings are to do is to help the legislature to better understand medical/recreational marijuana, depending upon what direction we're going to be going with it. But to better understand marijuana, what it is today versus what it was when a lot of these guys were growing up. It's a much different weed, I guess. As they're deciding what types of legislation they're going to be writing regarding marijuana, they need to have a better handle on what exactly marijuana does. There were several speakers that spoke. There were doctors who spoke clearly against it. Let's take a look at what they had to say.
It seems that the doctor in this relationship is being reduced to that of a straw man to lend some degree of legitimacy to recreational marijuana. The role of the physician in the medical marijuana program as it's currently designed is very minimal. There is not set up in this current program any way for a discourse to be allowed between the patient and physician. And that's something that happens in every therapeutic process with a physician and a patient. We don't just simply see the patient, make a diagnosis, treat them blindly, and never see them again.
So in this particular case, you've got two doctors who are essentially saying that as doctors, they're serving as, the term they used was straw men, that they're not really having a relationship with their clients, with their patients, because you can't have a patient-doctor relationship if all they're doing is signing off on a license for 2 years. They're not going to be following up. There's not any type of real relationship there. They don't feel as though their role as a doctor is really being fulfilled. They're just, again, as they said, a straw man. But we also heard from several veterans who were saying, we need this medical marijuana. This does make a difference. And especially as veterans, we need it not just for the pain that we suffer, but for PTSD issues. Let's take a look at those.
We know that we need to do something to help our veterans. We owe them that. We know that we owe the greatest generation in America far better than they're usually given. It is my hope that we see to it that nursing homes follow the law, allow their residents to get cards if needed, and that nursing homes are allowed to administer cannabis as they see fit.
I'm a stage 4 cancer survivor who used THC oil to survive stage 4 cancer, squamous cell carcinoma. I had a tumor on the base of my tongue and mouth the size of a golf ball. I went through 3 months of cisplatin chemo, and I would encourage you to look that up, and 35 radiation treatments right here that burned me so bad I couldn't function. I had a feeding tube sticking out of my gut. I couldn't eat or drink anything. Smoking marijuana allowed me to fight the nausea that was overwhelming every day of my life. I denied this for months as I struggled to survive and was in bed dying as my wife and 2 sons begged me, please, Dad, try this. I come from a culture that we were raised in the 60s and 70s, and we were told over and over again the evils of marijuana. Stay away from it. It will hurt you. It will destroy your family. It's no good. Crack the egg in the frying pan. That's your brain. I believed all that, as I think all of us believe that. I'm here to tell you, it ain't true.
So both make a pretty good argument. Going into it, I don't know how many legislators are going to be swayed, though, as they're writing legislation. I think that a lot of them already have their ideas about what medical marijuana is, how it should be regulated. I don't know as any minds were changed.
We should clear something up, though, too. The way the doctors are coming at this is a little disingenuous. There are rules about prescribing medical marijuana and providing medical marijuana. It is still illegal federally, so they would lose their DEA license to be able to prescribe drugs. But a Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals ruling said that discussing medical marijuana with your patient is protected speech under the First Amendment. And so to say that you wouldn't have any kind of relationship because you couldn't talk about it to recommend it is probably a lie. And they probably know that.
Sure.
I mean, if you look at any AMA, NIH, CDC, it's all in there. I think it's from 2010 or 2012. I don't have it in front of me here. But so to come at it like that is a little disingenuous, I would think.
But the requirements, the way they're spelled out right now, at a very bare minimum, if I go in to see my doctor and say, hey, I've got a pain in my shoulder, the doctor writes me it's not a script, writes me the license for medical marijuana, and then if I don't want to come back for the next 2 years, I don't have to.
It writes you the recommendation for the license that the state has to approve.
Right. We can still have that relationship, or if I choose not to as a patient, I can just skip it out for the next 2 years.
Right. Exactly. So it'll be interesting to see where that goes and whether doctors are comfortable with that, and we don't have a real legal framework for doctors yet, which is a whole other part of this, which could have been solved in a special session, but instead was not. So those things are going to have to be worked out. And if the legislature decides that they want to add a checkup requirement, that if you've got this license, you've got to go back every 3 months, every 6 months, halfway through the license period to check in with your doctor, because there is such a thing as marijuana dependency. Mm-hmm. And that's a real disorder. It's on the rise in states that have recreational pot. So I'm sure something like that will be in there to appease the doctors, but for them to say that, I think is slightly...
And you hit on something too, and I know that we've kind of beaten this to death, but again, we didn't have a special session because the governor didn't want to call one, because these guys were on the campaign trail. Again, putting politics before policy.
Right.
And there was another thing. Well, let's throw a live hand grenade into this discussion. There are a lot of folks. Coverage night here at News 9 in the primary. John Echols was on at 10 o'clock saying very forcefully, we don't want a special session. You know why they didn't want a special session? They didn't want the governor out there. Well, that's just, I know it, you know it, they know it. Her numbers are not good, and they didn't want a special session. But some of this nightmare scenario for the GOP has already come to pass, okay? Now, can I go back to this Doug Cox quote that we just played just a minute ago?
Yeah.
It's really interesting. This is the sort of thing that I saw early on. The folks, the business side of the medical marijuana discussion, they were very afraid. Guys like Bud Scott were very afraid of the Cheech and Chong thing working into the discussion. Now, I know it, you know it, everybody knows this. There were some folks out there that were for the medical marijuana because they wanted recreational.
Right.
Okay, and we agree on that one. That was pretty close. So Dr. Cox, who is a former House member in the GOP caucus, right? So this was his quote, in case to go back over it. Chronic pot users tend to develop a lack of motivation that affects the part of the brain that encourages us to get up, get out of bed, and have a productive life. The docs are itching to say these things. They got run over messaging. People like Bud Scott were much better on the messaging during the primary. They know that there's some real problems in terms of what they need to do. Some of the psychologists I interviewed said, or psychiatrists said, I'm afraid of losing control of how I treat my patients. This thing goes deeper, and it goes down to the medical guys, the business guys. You've got the lawmakers, the policymakers, and some folks that just really are looking for recreational marijuana.
Yep.
This thing has, when you unpack this issue, there's a lot of levels.
Yeah. And medical pot, drugs, medicine in general, it is a business at the end of the day. But after Dr. Cox made that comment, there was this audible groan where people who were in the audience were just kind of like, oh, kind of a thing. And I don't think he made a lot of friends that day.
Probably not, no. He also didn't say anything about time lost for people who have a nicotine addiction, thousands of hours in lost work.
Opioid addiction?
Opioid addiction.
He did address that.
Alcoholism. Oklahoma ranks high in all of those things. And what he didn't say, which he could have said those things and gotten himself out of that, which was we are concerned about adding another vice to the state, but didn't do that.
Right.
Instead targeted pot users.
And sort of implied at the same time that everything other than pot is okay in terms of vices.
Right. Right.
This is all Echols' fault as he walks into the studio.
He's over there.
Yeah. CBD is a... One of the things that I'm watching is the marketing of the CBD, which was John Echols. And who else was in with you on that bill?
Senator Brian Crane was the first other.
Crane.
That's right. So that experiment moved forward. And now that is somewhat, you're going to see the marketing is ingenious some ways it's genius. But for the free market gets a hold of all of this, you know what happens. You get to extremes. Let me get back to the procedures. What's going to happen now? Are there going to be more of these hearings? And if there are, when is this all going to wrap up and where are we headed?
There are going to be more hearings. I'm not sure when it's going to wrap up, but the legislators, they need this education right now as we're going forward with this. I mean, just sitting here for the past 10 minutes talking about this, we've identified issue after issue after issue after issue with medical marijuana. And there are a lot more that we're not even beginning to cover yet. So this is going to be, and John Echols has said this is going to be a trial and error type of thing for us, as it has been with every single state. We're going to be doing some things right, we're doing some things wrong, we're going to be tweaking it down the road. But the more information they can get now, the better.
Right, and if we end up with a bunch of problems come after, what is it, Saturday now?
Yeah.
Because that's when they're going to start taking applications tomorrow. We're doing this on Friday. So if we have run into a bunch of problems and they don't come back, it'll end up happening in February. But there are so many problems that I would not be surprised if they came back before Christmas this year.
All right, we're, 96 hours from early voting's now, okay? So we used to have this, there used to be this old rule about not covering stories so close to the election. That kind of went out in 2000 with the George Bush, the DUI. Remember,
yes.
About 48 hours, 24 hours before the election? What are you guys anticipating that campaigns are going to ramp up last-minute attacks and last-minute stories?
I think you've seen them already. I think you've seen them both in the governor's race and the attorney general's race. There's a new attack out against Mike Hunter right now. And I think we'll see some more in the down-ballot races, just to put those in people's minds before they start voting on Tuesday.
How do you cover those last-minute stuff?
Depends on where you work, but for me, anything that happens after today doesn't get covered. It's too close to the election. It's too close to start influencing things. You don't want to be influencing this close to the election.
Unless it's something major.
Yes.
If it's something major, then yeah. But it's a case-by-case basis, quite honestly. If they come out with another attack ad over the next couple of days, we're not going to truth test it. There's not going to be enough time to do so without influencing the election one way or another. And that's where we as journalists, ethically, we have to be very careful of that. We don't want to change the way that an election is going to go, but at the same time, we want to be able to present the facts.
All right, so by Friday, 5 o'clock, if the attacks or the stories aren't out, then probably a blackout period.
A little bit, yeah. Just polling after that.
Yeah. But I think that what we're going to see over the next few days, we're not going to see any more real venomous attack ads. I think at this point, these guys are going to be laying low. They're going to be pressing the flesh. They're going to be going to local diners, kissing babies, that kind of a thing. They don't want to come across in the moments before the election. They don't want people to think, this guy's a jerk in the moments before the election. So I think that people have enough information right now. They're going to keep on riding with the spots they have, maybe put in a couple of new ones, focusing more on issues, less on the venomous stuff, and just kind of ride it out till Tuesday.
All right, thanks for seeing our first video, the Mitchell Talks, the News 9 Stations. Grant Herms, Aaron Brobeck. For people that want to talk to you guys, with the clock is ticking, how do they get a hold of you, Aaron?
Best way for me is on Facebook or call me here at the station.
Same, Facebook, and call me. I'm on Twitter and Instagram, both at Grant Herms TV.
And Mitchell Talks on Facebook and on Twitter. It's at Mitchell Talks. Thanks for tuning in. See you next week.